Welcome to Sam Says. Today we will have three guests joining us: Desdemona, Jean Louise, Scout Finch, and Maya Angelou, who will be speaking about they surpass the stereotypes that surround them and finding their strength in a difficult and binding society. We'll first be joined by Desdemona of Venice, a young woman in the Shakespearean work of Othello, who herself was able to be viewed as someone other than a mere Venetian woman, and was able to rise to power against her own father in the midst of saving her own husband's life. So please welcome Desdemona. Thank you, Sam. I suppose it all began when I met the Moor, Othello, and began attempting to woo him. Although he was a Moor, I followed my heart, going against my father Brabantio. He was whom I, as his daughter, was meant to obey, I did what I wished for myself instead of what was expected of me. After Othello and I's romance was discovered, I myself was viewed as someone of genuine importance and was invited to the court of the Duke to testify against my father's claims. It was in this moment that I myself actually saved my husband's life by arguing against Brabantio that I was in fact in love with Othello, and I was, just as my own mother had, switched my loyalties to my husband. I said to him, "But here's my husband, and so much duty does my mother show to you, preferring you before her father, so much as I may challenge that I may profess due to the Moor, my lord." My father, of course, could not contradict me, because it was to him that my mother had switched her loyalty to, and he could not tell me to not be like my own mother. I myself was surpassing the bindings expectations of a woman in Venice by going behind my father's back and doing what I wanted for myself, and I even stayed my own husband's life through my cunning wit in the moment. Thank you for that beautiful story, Desdemona. So, as you say, you surpassed the expectations of a Venetian woman? How so? Well, in Venice, it is expected of a woman to be loyal, serve her husband, and it is assumed that they want nothing for themselves but physical pleasure. We weren't really viewed as real people, just whores or slaves. So me being called into court was the first real event that showed that I wasn't just an average woman. Then, I openly admitted to having gone behind my father's back and doing what I wanted for myself, and I used my own intellect to get what I wanted without any repercussions. And I also saved my beloved Othello from an undeserved fate. Wow, that is really amazing, people. Thank you, Desdemona. Next, we have Scout Finch of To Kill a Mockingbird, who is going to be telling us her story of being a strong girl who, just like Desdemona, didn't do what was expected of her. Sam. So, my story isn't nearly as dramatic as Desdemona's, but it's got the same basic principle. I was around 7 or 8 years old during the events of To Kill a Mockingbird, and I was in little old Maycomb, where I was usually overlooked. I enjoyed acting like a boy and hanging around boys, just like my brother. I got to act more freely that way, and it was easier. The first day of school that year, I had to wear a dress, and it was awful, honestly. It made it hard to run, and I looked really silly when I fought Walter Cunningham. A few months into the school year, my Aunt Alexandra came down from Finch's Landing and was determined to make me act more like a lady. However, I didn't do what was wanted of me, and that made it easier for me to exist as a person. So you just wanted to express your tomboyishness, and you eventually succeeded in achieving what you wanted for yourself? That's very admirable, especially for a child. Thank you for your story, Scout. Our final guest is a woman whose existence is not in literature, but in real-life issues of female repression. Here's a modern-day feminist, Maya Angelou. So Maya, you are a firm believer that women are not to be overlooked, which is something that happens frequently to this day. Care to share your point of view? Thank you for the introduction, Sam. When I was 7 years old, my schoolmates shouted at my sister and me as we walked home from school. We were told to go back where we belong and that we were unwanted. 7 years old. This is when a girl learns how to create internal celebrations about who we really are in relation to how the world sees us. This is when a feminist perspective is shaped. That moment when poetry and girlhood, lost innocence and race collide, with a few bratty white boys with sticks chasing you back to where you belong when you thought all along the whole world was yours. That is how women feel as they grow up. They lack the support that men receive, and that they assume that they can only do what is expected of them. That's the binding stereotype that surrounds women. They can't make decisions for themselves. They can't want things for their future, and that's what they need to stop thinking. If you want to show your strength, you have to break down the barriers that stand in your way. You have to beat the stereotypes. That is what I think. Thank you, Maya, for your incredible insight. So that's all for this episode of Sam Says. Tune in next week for a new story and why boys think it's okay to wear socks up to their knees with sandals. Gonna have lots of ladies tuning in that week. See you next week. So that's all for this episode of Sam Says. Tune in next week for a new story and why boys think it's okay to wear socks up to their knees with sandals. Gonna have lots of ladies tuning in that week. See you next week.